Okay, it's 5 and we're really like running short on, not short on time, but we have a lot to get through. Tonight, the artists presenting are Ayse Demir, Brandon Eversole, Jacky Lu, Marc Kate, Ryan Smith, Stephanie Andrews, Stephen Standridge, Steve Piasecki, and Vanessa Lee. They're going to be speaking in that order, and each artist will talk for about 10 minutes. And if they talk for less time, I'll ask you to use the Q&A feature and ask your questions to them. And then through that, and then they can answer them if there's time after their talk. But thank you for tuning in to this first ever virtual Gray Area Artist Salon. We generally do this obviously in stage, and it's the first time we've ever done this virtually. And I'm really excited to share with you the work people have been making. A lot of the folks who are in this incubator program we have at Gray Area have had to deal with the kind of stresses we all have of the pandemic and social isolation or social distancing, and had to pivot their work from doing pieces that would be sculptural or in-person or projected environmental work into something digital and online and virtual in that way. So it's been a process, and I'm really glad all of these people stuck with it and stayed with us on this journey. It's a, I don't even know how to put it. It's been a really interesting process just to go through this and try to make the work still happen, despite the fact that we're living through a really difficult time, and it's particularly hard, I think, for artists right now. So without further ado, the first artist we have speaking is Ayse, and she'll be starting now-ish. Ayse, if you want to tune it on and take it over.
Okay, thanks, Nikki. Can the host enable the screen sharing by any chance? Matt? Okay. Okay, so hi everyone. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate that you're all taking some time to listen what we are working on. So welcome. I want to start with a quick background about myself. My name is Ayse, and I'm taking this call from San Francisco today. I am originally from Turkey, and I was born, raised, and lived there until college. Although there was a brief period where I was back and forth between two countries, I moved to upstate New York to complete my degree in business in 2013 and have been living in the United States since then. After coming to the States, I realized that I actually really enjoyed studying business, but I found myself exploring other areas like scientific research and big data and psychology. So after college, I moved to San Francisco and finally found a job. But my visa was going to expire, so I decided to pursue a master's in digital arts while working full-time. And this gave me a chance to combine my skills in big data with design, and I finally started working as a data visualization designer. But in the meantime, a lot of crazy things were happening in Turkey, including a coup, political scandals and travel bans and all these other things. And I wasn't able to go back to Turkey for 3 years. And, it was very distressing at that time, but it was very eye-opening and useful at the same time. Because during those times, like yoga and art were my refuges, and they certainly shaped my outlook on life. Now I'm a certified yoga teacher as well, and it's a big part of my life and my art process. I first met with Gray Area through the Incubator, through the immersive program last year, which resulted in my first installation ever. It was a MIDI-controlled mixed media. And as you can see here, the person interacts with the nodes or a combination of the nodes, and they were mapped to feelings or like they were like mapped to certain visuals. You couldn't hear an audio right now, but this is what it looked like briefly, and it was a very exciting project for me. I am part of the Incubator program since this January, and the project that I'm going to talk about today is called Hidden Empathy. So a little background on this too. Until the end of last year, I really didn't think that I could be an artist, or in more accurate terms, I didn't have a trust in knowing how to tell what I want to tell. And art was always this disorganized practice that I didn't necessarily always act on my intuition, because I was always in this like survival mode, and I was moving a lot. So back in December, after finding my ground a bit, I really wanted to simplify things and wanted to go back to basics. So I started doing some readings on philosophy of art and questioning very basic things like, why do we call someone an artist? Or why abstract art is helping me a lot when I don't have a sense of who I am or where I belong. So the first very fundamental book was Abstraction and Empathy by Waringa. And I wasn't able to finish, but it became the concept of my project. And in this book, there are two main poles in all art philosophies. And the first one is really empathy, which happens when artist mimics the object. And then the second one is abstraction, which happens when artist wants to connect with the underlying meaning of the object. So, if you look at the works of Mondrian and O'Keeffe, they are actually very great naturalistic painters, but they look for something more meaningful with circles, triangles, and other geometric shapes. So looking at some of my practices and analyzing my own psyche from this perspective, I seem to be combining both empathy and abstraction at the same time. So this is a monotype print experiment of mine. And as you can see from those ghost prints of flowers and leaves, that, their individuality are almost lost and they are very impersonal, but they create a story with the help of those visually dominant geometric shapes. And here there are some quick sketches I have been making throughout the quarantine. There are many of them. I really enjoyed making them actually, and I really liked coloring them. But it's still, again, my tendency to make these figures interesting and fun, but in exchange of their individuality. Again, some of my work from my photography practice. I believe that these individual real-life images create a certain theme. When I insert some geometrical or abstract shapes in between them, it's almost like unioning different subpersonalities, So as you can see, I really like the idea of combining nature and abstract. And I decided that I want to create something, that avoids from firm statements. So I really want to give the audience a mental room to explore possibilities instead. Because, when we have room for possibilities, or when we have a room for unknown, regardless of who we are in the world or how we operate in the world, healing starts to happen. And that's what art did for me. So this is my pre-COVID concept. I initially wanted to create an audiovisual experience that the audience would see an image of nature and then slowly becomes part of it with the help of camera pointed at them. and then they would sort of deconstruct and continue merging until they fully become this pure abstract geometrical shape. But given the constraints, I had to refine and clarify this experience. So I have gotten rid of few components, considering now it will live on the web. So now the audience wouldn't necessarily be part of visuals, but instead they would listen, 2 to 3 minutes of meditation where they would see an animation of a still life nature image losing its identity and becoming the symbol or a pattern of unknown. In the end, I really want to achieve this feeling of spaciousness and expansiveness, and believing that some more softness, and room for unknown in our bodies and minds is going to be healing. So there are some references for the initial phase of the abstraction, and very basic pixel sorting seems to be very useful to achieve this sort of melting down or losing shape effect. And the second part is, it's the second phase of the animation where I would want to introduce some 2D shapes and maybe filling three-dimensional shapes with them. And, as you can see, there's still some movement or spirit in this transition phase. And in the last phase, everything would become what we call pure abstract. And, like those geometrical symbols like square, triangle, and line, they would sort of represent the beginning of everything. So in terms of technology, I'm hoping to produce my own ambient sound with the help of synthesizer. But finding a platform to create organic visuals has been a challenge for me. And I didn't necessarily know which tool to use or which way to go. So I spent some time exploring Cinema 4D and P5. And finally, in the last few weeks, with the help of one of my artist friends in the Incubator program, I have decided to use Touch Designer. And I'm investing some time nowadays learning the tricks, and I can say that I'm a true beginner, but I'm hoping to create something that can, get us outside of ourselves, even for 2 minutes. So that's it for me. Thank you for listening, and hope to see you in the showcase virtually. And thanks overseas and San Francisco friends for joining this call.
I say we have one question, and they want to know, what is the driving force behind your art? Is it like abstract storytelling, or what is guiding it?
I think I can say that looking back at my art, it's always dealing with identity, and it seems that abstract is sort of creating this this union effect. So there is like one core self that I would call it as abstract. That's, like sort of like it is a driving force of all different identities, sub-identities. And thanks to my therapist for that explanation, actually. She made that analysis, and probably she's here listening today too.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Ayse. It was a pleasure. And her contact info is right there. So if you want to contact her and ask for more questions, you can. And next up, we have Brandon Eversole, who's been also doing a lot of image manipulation and exploring time-based media.
Thank you, Nikki. I think everyone can hear me. So first, I just want to say also thank you so much for being here, especially in times like this. Creating is my therapy, and having a community and a space to do that in really does it means everything. So thank you for being here. Let's see. So my name is Brandon Eversole, and I'm working on a project that is kind of these video sculptures. It's very abstract, so I thought it might make sense to kind of first start with a little bit about me. I was born in 1980, which means that this was pre-smartphones. The internet wasn't really around until later, and computers weren't everywhere. But I was lucky enough that we had a computer in our house. It was a Commodore 64, and this is my sister and I was around this age, around 6, and I wanted to play games. I heard you could play games on this magical machine. But instead of an app store, my dad gave me a book. And in the book, there was 100 programs, and you just kind of had to like key them in. And I did this, and I went through, and I realized, you know, I didn't learn anything about programming, but I learned that you could use this machine to do things or to make things. The first thing I made or copied, I guess, was dice. So there was always this kind of ongoing joke in my family that this 6-year-old kid is programming and learning to gamble. I didn't really know much about either. It wasn't until I learned that you could draw on them that I became absolutely obsessed. So I kind of took in everything. I wanted to know about animation and creating different small little games. And it just really, it took like all of my energy, all of my attention. And the byproduct was I got a little bit better at the computer stuff. And the timing for me right around my high school was the dot-com boom. So I actually ended up starting like working straight out of high school, still am. But it landed me in an environment like this, which my programming got better, but I lost that kind of creative outlet, and the fun part for me was missing. I was also getting a little burned out with computers themselves. At the time, DSLRs were kind of just getting to the point where they could have cinematic quality video. So I decided I wanted to kind of check out filmmaking. And I went through the process of learning how to make films, which was awesome, really rewarding, really like a lot of work. And still I'm involved with that kind of stuff now. It's all very indie stuff. A lot of these projects take a really long time to get on the ground, and some of them can be kind of on the shelf and then back to working. So I was still wanting to kind of work on something of my own that wasn't as huge of a scale, something that I could have, you know, more control over. And I also wanted to break away from just like a flat screen for presenting stuff. And I live in San Francisco, and I found this really awesome space where they do audio-visual work, and it's out of an old movie theater in the Mission. It was awesome, and I really wanted to be a part of it. So I reached out and became part of the Incubator program. This was the last season. This was my second term with them. But the way it works is at the end, you go through, you work with a bunch of different artists, and you get to explore, but you put on a show in a 10-foot by 10-foot space. And so I started prototyping, trying to figure out, well, what was I going to put in this space? And the idea that I really kind of found myself playing with the most, or was drawn to the most, was this kind of slit scan or time distortion over a cube. And this was done with 3JS. I was doing a lot of prototyping just where I could quickly run through ideas. The technique itself kind of is used in film quite a bit, where they stretch out or you get to kind of displace time. They were doing it with analog cameras, and now with digital, it was even easier. But this was like really interesting to me because not only could I get that side stretched view, but there was also all the information of what was going on inside the cube. So I thought it would be interesting to be able to kind of cut into and see that. So I wanted to come up with a shape that would work for that. And this was the shape that I came up with. And these different cubes, it would be treated like that previous one where it was kind of moving through time, but now you'd be able to see into it. I built this one out of foam core, and this was what I installed. So this is some footage from the installation itself. This is me on there, but it had a webcam where people could come up and interact with it, which was really pretty cool to watch and to see. I also ran some motion graphic stuff that I had done through it, and I was really just trying to test to see how it would play in the space and how it would work and what the feedback from people. So I do think that I'm going to keep the live audio in the next, or live video in the next piece, but I don't want it to be as large or as consuming of the overall structure. So I'm working on ideas to kind of integrate both the motion graphics with the video in a more organic way. So I started doing a lot of, or am doing a lot of research on how do I, since this is not just a regular video editing, how do I get to try out ideas and see what's going on? So I've been building out different ways to slice into these video chunks and kind of start to learn the language of what does it mean to work with this media in this space. So there's a lot of interesting things you can do with straight lines and straight cuts, but I wanted to really be able to cut into this time cube or chunk of video in a way that wasn't just flat. And I came across a technique called ray marching. It's probably, if there's people out there that are working in the 3D space or any kind of gaming or real time, it's probably something you're already familiar with, but it was new to me. And it kind of really opened up a whole new world as far as the shapes and the types of sculptures that I could be prototyping. And so here's an example of taking a cube, and now I'm able to like pull out of the center of it. And it just, I've spent so much time now going through these different prototypes and examples. It's really kind of taking me in a direction that I'm liking. So I've got some more where this is kind of like spinning around, and this is all cutting into the same footage of the ocean. This one is like one that's more of a blobby kind of animation moving. I wouldn't use the animation pieces in a still sculpture, obviously, but what I'm learning is like what type of footage works well with it. I'm thinking a lot about time and entropy, and there's like what imagery would play well across time to kind of stretch that out and get the effect. This was my last one, and it was really starting to merge a lot of things together. I think I'm getting close to the place where I can start finalizing a shape or come up with what is the next sculpture going to be. So I'm excited about that, and it's going well. I think, you know, well, one of actually the challenges that we have now is, since we are not going to have a space to work in with this kind of COVID reality, now I have to figure out like how do I implement this in a 3D or virtual or AR space and still kind of have this this effect of being this physical thing. So I'm really kind of exploring I think more of the AR stuff now. And originally I wanted to stay away from virtual and I wanted to be physical, but the more I see out there, the more I'm kind of excited about just what it could be. So I think that's going to be a short, have to figure stuff out quickly, but I think that's going to be kind of building into the next space. So that's, I think I'm running out of my time, but I have, I post a lot of these examples to Instagram. So if you want to check them out, or if you're on there, please do. Also, I've been meeting a ton of really creative people in this community, so I'd love to see what you guys are up to. And that's really all that I have. So
thank you, Brendan. Are there any questions folks have? I didn't see any on the Q&A, but we have like one more minute.
Okay.
If there is a question, I'll wait a second to see. Oh, none have come. No questions. Okay, I'm gonna start my video. All right, so we don't have questions, but I really, really highly recommend following Brandon on Instagram. He's super prolific and just does amazing work. That always makes my day when I see what you've been making. Yeah, and it's really nice to see actual artists making artwork on social media rather than just, you know, people trying to sell you things. The next artist we have is Jacky Lu, who's probably, I think, the youngest member I've ever had in the incubator, and a really exciting emerging emerging artist who's doing a lot of work with machine learning and is going to teach us about that. I've learned a lot from him already, so I hope you guys do too.
Ooh, cool. Hopefully my sound is working. Hi, I just want to thank everyone for coming out, and I'm just going to jump right into it. Hi, I'm Jacky. So a lot of my past experience lies in traditional artwork, so oil painting, drawing, and mixed media. But I've also worked as a researcher focused on computer vision in my time at UC Berkeley, and now work as a machine learning engineer in my day-to-day. And a common theme of my work is using computation as a mode of expression. And my work is generally centered around creating meaning through visual language and to create visual work that is compelling and hopefully astonishing. Oh, no. Cool. So diving into a little bit of my previous work. So in another life, I was a painter, and I've always kind of been fascinated with this idea of expressing form through the interplay of shapes and colors. I love the expressivity that's afforded with kind of the physical brush and the human craftsmanship that's involved with it. And sometimes what I think about is that the observer of the painting is able to kind of recognize a subject amongst these kind of abstract shapes. And I love the idea of using kind of like a visual language to evoke meaning and feelings in the viewer. And I think it was time at Berkeley where art kind of took a backseat in my life, but it's also where I kind of discovered computation as a potential medium of expression. So the top photo is from a graphics project that I was doing research on. It was applying computer vision to some point cloud data. And I honestly thought that it looked pretty cool. And I started seeing a beauty in the kind of work that I was doing. And that second photo is a project that I was doing where I applied style transfer to a 360 video. And I can kind of like look around in the scene a little bit. And what struck out to me about this project was I kind of gave this normal looking forest landscape a kind of surreal and interesting feeling to it. And I did this through a process that was essentially just a mathematical optimization problem, and kind of using this computation as a mode of expression to kind of imbue this normal looking scene with a kind of like feeling and emotion to it. So that's when I started thinking about how can I kind of combine the two. So the bottom photo is an image that was generated through like the normal style transfer algorithm. And the top was a commission that I did where I took an image that was generated through style transfer and kind of did my own artistic reinterpretation of it through painting and different mixed media work. And since then, I've been thinking a lot about how do we combine this computational visual language with a man-made like artistic vision. Cool. So before I dive into what I'm working on now, let's talk a little bit about the kind of networks that I'm using. So the latest and greatest in image generation is what's called generative deep networks. And I guess the special sauce is in this like FX that you're looking at. The idea is how do we take some kind of input data, apply some kind of calculations and transformations onto it, and generate data that looks like a realistic and detailed image of the world. And the latest and best is this network that's called a GAN. And without diving too much into it, you can kind of think of it as basically like a function, like an f of x, where you take some input data, you feed it through this network, and it spits out this image. And the nuance here is that this is obviously a really complicated calculation. And what we're doing here is we're taking advantage of deep networks that kind of mimic the cognitive processes in our brain to apply these complicated calculations to create this kind of image. Cool. And some influences that I've had, and these are kind of some of the trailblazers in this space of using GANs and applying them to artistic purposes. So the first one is Mario Clingerman. He's probably a pretty big name in this field that you might recognize. He's done some pretty extensive work with the application of image generation with GANs for artistic purposes. And he's especially kind of paved the way for things like using GANs to mimic traditional artistry in terms of like paintings and whatnot. So you can kind of see that this visual artifact kind of looks like something that's been painted. The second one is this artist named Holly Grimm. She produced this kind of realistic looking traditional artwork completely using a image analogy model. And the interesting thing here is that she used her own traditional artwork as input to the model, and the model is able to generate this entire image kind of using her own artwork as a frame of reference. And in this way, she's creating like a machine to create works of art that are similar to hers in a way, but are wholly like unique in its process and the final output. So I'll talk a little bit about what I'm working on now. Kind of the things that I'm thinking about when I'm pursuing this project is we can kind of view these deep generative networks as a series of calculations that creates a huge space of possible images. And we can think about these possible images as kind of like a visual vocabulary or the computer's own view of realistic images and thus its own visual reality in a sense. So somehow in that function, that f of x that we're talking about, there's an encoded representation of this visual reality. And it's a computational artifact that we can kind of poke and prod at, and we can dissect and explore this series of computational steps to get images. And a central question that I had is, how can we use this computed artifact to create some kind of visual language that we can use in creating compelling visual pieces? So my project, A Neural Garden, is a project dedicated to kind of try to portray the natural world through a mixture of computed and an artistic visual language. And the thing that's interesting here is because it's kind of mimicking the human thought process, it's going back to the kind of root fascination that I had with a viewer being able to see a painting and kind of understand it and get some kind of emotional reaction to it. And I think that this process of generating images through input data and being able to create an interpretable reality is, if not mimicking human cognition, it's kind of lying in parallel to it. And it's interesting to kind of take this process and be able to poke around and dissect and play around with, extracting this visual reality from the computed artifact. So here's an example of a model that I trained. You can see that it's slowly learning to produce higher quality images of nature. And it starts out pretty low resolution and it gets pretty good near the end. And it's slowly building up this visual vocabulary that I was talking about. And each of these images are generated by like kind of choosing a random vector as an input data and seeing what the image will like produce at the other end of the function. Cool. So what we have now is a kind of morphing landscape that I generated. And what we're looking at now is we're kind of traversing a path along the input data. So we're taking some random points and we're sampling points that lie on this path. And we're getting a kind of like smooth path across what you can consider like the visual vocabulary of the model. So like across this space of all the realistic images that the model can recognize and produce, we're kind of taking a walk along that visual like space, that manifold. Cool. So in terms of next steps, obviously this project's not done yet. Right now it's creating images that are roughly 512 by 512, which is not very high resolution. So I'm thinking about using some combination of like maybe an image analogy network and traditional means to increase this resolution and maybe like add other kind of visual elements to it by increasing the resolution. And also being able to combine these processes with physical media, whether that's the use of mixed media, collage, and using traditional artwork as input data to the model to try and create something that like is both new and evokes feelings of our natural world. Yeah, and that's my presentation. Thanks so much for coming through.
Thank you, Jacky. That was awesome. I just love that landscape you're making. And I don't see any questions right now, but you guys do have his info right here on Instagram, website, and Gmail. And he's also featured on the Gray Area webpage, so you could find him there as well. Hi. So thank you, Jacky. The next artist we have is Marc Kate, who is member of the Incubator as well as the recording studio we lovingly refer to as Crowbar Corner. And so he's a musician, a podcaster, and a teacher as well. Without further ado, I will I'll leave you in his capable hands. Marc. Oh, is Marc unmuted. And videoed. There we are. Yay.
Hear me? I'm having a bit of trouble with my
I can hear you. Your presentation.
All right, there we go.
There it is.
Hi everyone, thanks for being here. And thanks especially Nikki and everyone at Gray Area for putting this together. My name is Marc Kate. I'm a Canadian-American musician and podcaster based in San Francisco. The music I make is primarily in the idiom of power ambient, which is a term I don't especially like, but it's pretty descriptive. So that would combine the genres of power electronics with ambient. So a music that's sustained and droning and meditative, but would potentially have the opposite effect of, say, new age music. Other artists who might get lumped in with this category would be like Lawrence English or Clara Lewis or Basinski or The Caretaker. Broadly, I frame my project as a musician as ambient realism. Ambient referring to both the minimal and meditative music genre, while realism refers to the work as simultaneously concrete, an evolution of musique concrète, and as a rooted philosophical and political object. I'm also a podcaster. I produce the podcast Why We Listen, which is conversations about music, and I co-produce the podcast Scary Thoughts, Horror, Philosophy, Culture, and its offshoot podcast Self-Help for Nihilists. And just a quick note about podcasting, I will be teaching a class next week on Monday and Wednesday. It's a 6-hour produce your own podcast workshop through Gray Area. So if you're interested, reach out to me and or go to grayarea.org and sign up. So now let's talk about black metal briefly. Black metal is a music genre that is far too complicated to properly summarize in this very short time I have, but in brief, it is a subgenre of heavy metal that arose in the 80s, but especially in the 90s, that is overtly satanic, misanthropic, and nihilist. And the black metal story really took shape in Sweden and Norway, but quickly spread all over Europe, the US, Japan, and has become global, constantly evolving its aesthetics, its sounds, and its values. At its outset, black metal artists committed acts of arson against ancient churches, committed murder, desecrated cemeteries. So this genre and its subculture is framed not just by extreme music, but by extreme action that has carried on through the years by anybody in the scene committed enough. However, black metal has a real Nazi problem. Like many extreme musics, extremity comes with extreme politics. So this subgenre of metal has always had at its core misanthropy, nihilism, violence, hatred, both as aesthetics in the music and in its culture. But if you wonder how far that can go, this is National Socialist Black Metal, or NSBM. Along with the themes of Satanism, misanthropy from black metal come a focused, directed hatred. So xenophobia, neo-Nazi ideologies, nationalist paganism. Black metal, like many subcultures, like punk and hip-hop, is obsessed with authenticity. However, this neo-fascist aesthetic is often just shock value, so often just stupid kids experimenting with being extreme. However, I believe in taking people at their word. I don't really believe in trolling. And there are a lot of artists who are deeply committed to this terrible ideology via music. So just because there are a lot of lost, angry young men looking for community in the wrong places doesn't mean that this isn't a very real culture with a real impact. I'm going to quickly play you 2 examples of National Socialist black metal. This piece is called Fourth Reich by Goatmoon. Okay, etc., right? And really quick, this is Domination by the band Hate Forest from their album Purity. spent several months scanning through the music of the extreme right, especially focusing on NSBM, and I became pretty obsessed and horrified with this whole project and asked, how can I create some sort of music-based reaction to it? I believe very strongly that art matters, music matters, art has an effect on the world and its population, maybe not as much as direct action or making public policy, but it shapes us nonetheless. And this brought me to three approaches or strategies. Obviously, anti-fascist aesthetics. What are they? How do they operate? Are they ever responsible for interesting art, which I constantly ask myself when confronted with politically based art? Détournement, or hijacking, a strategy for recontextualization of content. And sampling, a method for recontextualizing music that already exists. And I had a lot of examples I wanted to play for you. There's no time, so let me just surf through them really quick. I was very inspired by works like Bob Ostertag's Sooner or Later, Vaporwave, the genre, which takes mundane pop and corporate music to make critiques about consumer capitalism. And this is John Oswald, who coined the term plunderphonic, which he frames as audio piracy as a compositional prerogative. So I created Deface as a way to conceptually and aesthetically undermine fascist music. And I'll play two brief examples from the first iteration of this project that I released in 2017. This is Deface 4. This music I'm playing now is extracted and altered NSBM like the music I was playing for you earlier. I've taken the sonic, the aggression out of the sound, and I used it as a sort of palette and transformed it into something potentially beautiful and contemplative. All right, and this is Deface 5. So I subverted the source material and created a series of elegiac, fragile drones, almost veering into the territory of New Age. And these meditations on physical and musical violence are using only the source material of National Socialist black metal and no additional sounds. But Deface is not merely an inversion of National Socialist black metal, it is dolorous. It mourns. It's my reaction to this really troubling political moment and evoking, hopefully, a sense of loss. And this work has also been used in a series of performances by choreographer Keith Hennessy titled Sync, which took place in San Francisco, Boston, Seattle, and Dresden. And this was an additional action in Dresden with maybe my favorite poster I've ever been listed on. I usually start work with a series of questions that I want to explore. And with Deface, my questions were about noise versus traditional notions of music, traditional musicality versus abstraction, process versus product, and the question, does ambient music have the potential for resistance? And just for people who are interested, I primarily used, or maybe actually misused, denoising plugins like Waves and Isotopes RX, and spectral filters like those made by Amazing Noises and Paul Stretch to make this music. But when I released Deface, it didn't feel finished, really. And so over the last few months, especially during quarantine, I've started working with this process again. But I think a lot of my questions around this work have changed. How has fascism changed? How has anti-fascism changed? How have the tools changed for creating this kind of work? And even self-reflexively, how and why have my original questions changed? And that's it. Please feel free to connect with me if you have any thoughts or questions about this work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark. That was awesome. We have one question I'll ask you real quick.
Yeah.
Isn't it a bit, isn't it expected that a genre of music traditionally heavily using concepts like evil, demons, and hell has a connection with fascism?
Not necessarily, but kind of. I mean, this is a question that happens in industrial music and a lot of other music where it often comes with the territory. Like, you want extreme, dark, violent music, you're gonna get the extreme end of dark, violent culture that comes with it.
And then another question is, does ambient music have the potential for resistance?
I don't know. I mean, I think that if any art can have the potential for resistance, I don't know that any art can be refused from that domain. If we look at this music and are alarmed by it, the National Socialist black metal, if we're like, oh, worried about its potential, well, then we have to also assume that something in resistance to it has the potential for transformation as well. One art isn't inherently more loaded than another, I feel. That doesn't mean I'm out there on the front lines changing the world by making droning music, but the hope is that it is having some sort of making some sort of cultural statement.
And finally, the approach to challenging work by transforming it is really interesting. While it inverts it, does it amplify fascism / NBSM political ideology by giving it visibility?
I think that question comes up a lot whenever you take something and transform it. Are you just sort of reifying it by giving it a voice? I don't know. I feel like politically, outside of art, I feel that that's generally true. I just, don't feed the trolls. I think it's pretty obvious. But here, I just sort of feel like it's worth the conversation, right? And I feel like my making this work is sort of invoking the conversation, like we're having right now.
Yeah, I would agree. So everyone feel free to check out Marc's work, as well as definitely join his class, which we're offering at a super reduced rate to try to get more attendees and expose people to the power of the podcast, which now we have a lot of time and we're stuck at home. So take that. I think the workshop's on Monday at, is it at 5?
Yes.
Yeah,
5 to 8,
5,
and then 5 to 8 again on Wednesday.
On Wednesday. So join Marc for that workshop. You're really excited. I'm super excited about it. I'm going to try to do it.
Thanks.
Thank you, Marc. And next up, we have also the other music studio member, Ryan Smith, who's a musician, an educator, and a touring member of Caribou, which is I feel like very exciting. So take it away.
Okay, let me just share my screen. Hi, everyone. I'm going to go into present mode here and get my notes, hopefully. Can everyone see the screen properly?
I can see your screen, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Oh, now it's kind of moved down.
What about now?
Yeah, it's okay now.
Okay, I'm just trying to get my notes in front of me here.
Oh, yeah. Did you just share that one window?
Yeah.
Okay, it looks okay.
Okay. Sorry, let me just try this again. Damn.
So yeah, pull the notes out into a new window, and then just share the one window.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do, but I can't see the two.
You may need to unshare and then reshare. Stop sharing your screen and then reshare it once you've got it all set up separately.
Oh, okay. Hang on, sorry.
It's okay.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah, anyway, I'm glad that you are all here. Once again, welcome and thank you for joining us. This is the first time we've had Marc and Ryan from our music studio speak at a salon. I'm really happy to have them speak, and I also want to point out how good Marc sounded because he has that awesome microphone and he knows how to podcast. So I feel like that was its own advertisement for the workshop, and also just learning like how to do great remote programming.
how is that? Wait, no one can see that yet. Can you see this?
There is a way where you can share just one window when you do screen share rather than the whole thing, but it looks fine now.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll just go through. I've got my notes on my phone, and it's just sort of my notes. Sorry, everyone, for the delay. So yeah, my name is Ryan Smith, and I am a musician, and I've been a quote-unquote professional musician for almost 20 years now, and I have a studio at the Gray Area, as Nikki mentioned, and this is the first time I've ever been asked to do an artist salon. And I don't particularly consider what I do capital A art like everyone else is doing here, or maybe even think I'm taking like a kind of philosophical artistic approach to what I do, like Marc's work does, for example. And so I just kind of wanted to talk about what I do as a musician and like kind of put it into this format of the artist salon and try and follow along the format and maybe relate some of my experiences in music to everyone here, the fellow artists, people interested in this stuff, and follow the template as best I can and hopefully find some common ground with people. So this is a picture of me, and no, I am not delivering pizzas in that picture. I'm putting a bunch of records that I made under the name Teraval, which is some techno music I make, into mailers to mail out to people who bought my records on Bandcamp. And I sometimes think being a working musician is more like being a pizza delivery guy or a long distance trucker than a capital A artist. And so that's why I included this image. And like I say, I've been doing music as my kind of primary job for almost 20 years. And I'm going to tell you a bit about what I do in music aside from mail records out in the rain. So I tried to boil down what music is in a kind of artistic terms. And I thought, well, like at its very essence, what I do is I make loud and quiet noises to facilitate enjoyment or beer sales for groups of varying sizes. And at the moment, I'm really working on like thinking about all this stuff now that we're kind of on a pause in our work. And I'm going to get to a bit of some big things that in my life that got paused due to the COVID crisis. I've just been kind of thinking about my experience in music and my experience of work as a kind of cultural worker and success and failure in the kind of political time we're living in, late stage capitalism, and also in the kind of COVID era. And as I started to think about this, I thought it's not entirely true that I've never experienced an artist salon or an or a critique sort of situation. And in fact, that sometimes does happen in my life. Like, for example, when I make music, I can sometimes send it really quickly to a friend of mine who's playing a festival, for example, and get immediate feedback. And this is a video of just that happening a couple of years ago when I finished a track called Aardvark and sent it to my friend who happened to that day to be playing in Japan at a giant festival.
We can't hear it, Ryan.
You can't hear it? Oh, sorry.
Did you do share computer audio?
Yeah, let me do that again. Aha, there we go. Sorry, guys. Let me try that again. Now?
Yeah, we can hear
it. Okay. Anyways, this is like a kind of very direct way that you get feedback as an artist in music, and sometimes it works out well, like in that video, and sometimes not. So that's one of the things I do. I make techno records, and I sometimes DJ under the name Teraval. And I also make ambient music or like kajmish kind of music with my wife under the name Bathing. And this is a little bit of music piece of music that we made for an event that was called an ambient rave that actually took place at Gray Area, and we played inside that structure you see there, which is like kind of light sculpture with some foliage around it and a liquid lighting setup, and the audience was sort of lying around in a circle around that stage, and all the artists over the night played in there, and it was sort of, yeah, like a cross between a rave and an ambient event, which I love very much. And the music that we make as Bathing is kind of very calm and free-flowing like that, like ambient kind of music. And the big thing that I do, which I consider my day job and is kind of the all-consuming part of my life when it's allowed to happen, is I play in the band Caribou. And I don't know if you can see the arrow on my screen, but that's me way in the back there. And this is a really big gig that we played in London, a festival, and we're kind of do these kind of shows fairly regularly now. But I wanted to show you this picture in particular because it's from a really weird moment in my life in music. And I'm not just showing it to you to show you that I'm like a cool guy who plays in a big famous band. At the moment that this photo is taken, Caribou was at the height of their success. You know, we had released a really big album that tons of people really loved, and we were playing this, headlining this festival. There's about 20,000 people there, and we were getting paid more money than I'd ever imagined it would be possible when I started playing music as a kid to play a show. But I was having a really big existential crisis right before this was happening. And it was just a very weird moment because I had arrived at this place of really rare success. Like, it's very, very rare to make your living in music at all, let alone, you know, have this many people be interested in seeing you play a concert. And I'm completely aware of that and grateful for that. But for some reason, this kind of reaching this point made me really anxious and unhappy. And on top of that, you know, realizing that, I felt also a kind of additional level of terrible because I had become sort of like a cliched, jaded musician, and, you know, like, couldn't be an more unrelatable personality that, you know, you've lived this dream of becoming this successful musician and you're not really enjoying it. It sort of feels like, you know, you're a bad character from a terrible movie or something like that. And so I sort of felt like I had failed at succeeding in a sense. And I always think of this moment when I think of like failure and success. And right before I went on stage, my friend Paul, who is a Marxist political lecturer, told me something that really hit home at the time, which was that ultimately we are all workers. And at the time, I was kind of less of a Marxist and less interested in leftist politics. And so I sort of turned this into a silly kind of self-help koan, which was that I love what I do, but sometimes I would love not to do it. But I really, you know, came to learn what this meant afterwards, which is just that success is not freedom under capitalism. You may be very successful, but you may not want to do what you do, and you're still subject to market forces and obligations to do work, even when you may not really want to do it. And I don't have anything more particularly in depth. It's just an interesting paradox, the art and success that I came upon. And now, before you think that I'm, you know, a real like red diaper baby Marxist, this is a picture of Caribou's latest album being advertised on a giant billboard alongside delicious Hershey chocolate bars in Times Square, New York, a few months ago. And this is our latest album that is about to come out, or came out in February 2020, which was right before something a little less cool got released into the world. And so just before the COVID crisis really took over and swamped the world, we were in London, UK, which is where my bandmate Dan, who writes all the Caribou music, lives. And I used to live in London as well. And we were rehearsing in this big warehouse space, which is kind of set up like a fake venue. You can set up all your lights and equipment and stuff and sort of rehearse like full concerts in there. And so we were doing that right up to the minute, basically, that all of the travel bans came into effect, and we had several months of shows scheduled ahead of this. And so like right as all the travel bans were kind of coming into effect, we sort of packed away all our equipment on the eve of this tour we were supposed to do, and all hopped on planes and kind of basically scrambled back to our homes. And in fact, I had to leave a bunch of my music equipment sitting in an airport in Toronto with some of my other bandmates just to make the last flight out to San Francisco. And so, you know, this artist Salon asks, well, what challenges and obstacles are you facing and overcoming? And I would say one of the biggest things that I'm facing right now is that all of the work that I had lined up for the next, well, more than a year and a half has been canceled kind of at the last minute due to the COVID crisis, which I'm not alone in this. I'm sure everyone's had work of some kind and art projects and things canceled. We've had approximately like 80 to 100 concerts we were supposed to tour on the back of this album, all just sort of cancel and evaporate. And we're hoping it'll start again next year, but who knows when things will get back together again. And in fact, this week I'm supposed to be here, which is a beautiful mountainous region near Nagano in Japan. And we're supposed to be playing a festival here. And I have a whole bunch of friends and family who live in Japan. And so I'm quite sad to not be there. But it's kind of interesting at this moment, like experiencing this as an artist who's not able, or, you know, cultural worker who's not able to do their work, because I kind of get a chance to catch my breath and think about all the things that have gone on in the last like 5 or 10 years of work for me. And one of them is, you know, remembering all these incredible shows and incredible places I've been lucky enough to play, and really think like, wow, that was amazing. Because a lot of the time, some of this stuff goes by in a blur in a way, and you don't really get to savor it at the time. And now I'm really remembering all these things and savoring all the cool times I had with my bandmates and friends and family playing shows. But it's also a bit bittersweet because who knows when we'll get to do it again. And so one of my desired outcomes of this kind of project of being a musician in COVID times, as I framed it, the best I can say is just that I would like to keep on trucking and keep on doing music as much as I can in this time, and maybe find some new ways of doing it as well. And one of the ways that that has kind of come to pass recently is that I have started teaching a class, as Nikki mentioned, here at Gray Area about modular synthesis. And I'm also probably going to start teaching maybe some other kind of classes, but this is my main one that I do. And honestly, teaching this class, I did it online for the first time a few weeks ago and done it in the classrooms here at Gray Area prior to the COVID crisis. And we'll probably hopefully keep on doing them again once we're allowed to be in the same room as other people. This brings me almost as much joy as playing giant shows. And so that's been a really cool development, and definitely part of my, you know, impacted my artistic process, because I sort of have to think about what I do in a more like rigorous way instead of just doing it instinctually, try and explain how I do certain, in this case, technical things with synthesis to people of various educational status in this area, not status, educational sort of achievements, I don't know, yeah, working at various levels with synthesis. So that's been really cool to do. And this is the studio we have here at Gray Area called affectionately Crowbar Corner, which it looks, you know, if maybe you can tell by looking behind some of the nice soundproofing and equipment that this used to be a tool shed. And that's why it's called Crowbar Corner, because that's where we stored the crowbars before it got turned into a studio. And in this space, I kind of help other musicians in the community record DJ mixes or record their own music. And I've helped people mix records in here and create music. And also, yeah, work on some of my solo projects when I'm not rehearsing for Caribou. And Marc is also a member of the studio and does really cool work in here. And I'm kind of hoping that, you know, teaching and giving people access to this space as possible over the next little while, and access to these tools and knowledge, and helps people prepare some of their own kind of musical works, deliver some of their own musical pizzas, if you will. And so these are kind of what I'm working on at the moment, is keep on trucking through this very weird time for music makers and workers of all kinds. Cook up some delicious musical pizzas of some kinds and deliver them to the world in their boxes. Work on some new techniques and sounds, and just trying to be a good dude in a weird new world outside of what I do in music and art. And
Ryan,
yeah,
we're getting to time,
yep.
So if you just want to wrap up.
Yeah, I've got one more slide, which is just my name. And I was going to say, if anyone wants to get in touch to make music or learn about music or learn some musical techniques over the next little while, I'd be happy to do so. And thanks for coming. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Ryan. That was awesome. And we don't have time for questions, but you can put them in the Q&A and I'll give them to, Ryan will be able to see them if you enter them in there, and he can actually type the answer.
Yeah, sure.
So feel free to, if you have questions for him, just type them into there.
Happy to chat.
Next up, yeah, thank you. Next up, we have Stephanie Andrews. Let me turn my video on. That's weird. I don't know why I did that. Stephanie is a teacher in our Creative Code Immersive program, an Incubator member, and was also a member of our Experiential Space Research Lab that put on the last show we had, they call The End of You, which is very aptly named given that the world is collapsing right when the show closed. So Stephanie, take it away.
Can you see the presentation, Nikki?
Yes.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Andrews. I'm an artist and experience designer. I also, like Nikki mentioned, am one of the instructors of the Creative Code Immersive here at Gray Area. I tend to make weird sentimental art games and playful tactile installations that respond to emergent and speculative issues and that explore economies of care and communication. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm really excited to share a little about my art practice with you all and about one of my newest projects, the Web Wide World, a place where you can visit anything. But first, I'd like to start by sharing a few other projects from my body of work and through that, themes of interest. My art often explores perception and shifting perspectives. And I guess you could say that's true about a lot of art, but I like doing this interactively. This project, Fragment Space, is a simple, tiny, interactive, and exploratory looking glass that presents the current world around you in a different way, and in a way that you very literally have agency over its presentation and perception. You could put its pieces back together somewhat meditatively, or continue shifting them around to create a new composition. A lot of my work uses interaction design and new media to promote participatory engagement. This piece, Peering Through, was an interactive site-specific installation I developed with my collaborator, Fabian Leva-Barragan. This installation challenges visitors to take a deeper look at the people and communities behind issues portrayed by the media. As you come closer to the wireframe, the content within it is reframed. The frame itself becomes a kind of window, expanding and changing what you perceive very literally, from narrowly scoped news segments about humanitarian crises to longer, more intimate home videos made by people on both sides of the border. I also really enjoy using a lens of speculative design to poke at contemporary issues. This piece, Hug Machine, is a silly and sentimental game about learning how to hug. It's a simple and tangible experience that explores emotional labor, consent, and communication, set in a post-apocalyptic future where we're all emerging from radiation-safe bunkers to relearn how to engage with one another physically with care, following centuries of communication solely via Twitter. My work tends to oscillate between being funny and heartfelt, between being tender and irreverent. I like drawing from and subverting news, media, and current events, but doing so in order to make these topics and art more broadly feel accessible for myself and for others. This piece, What the Camera Sees, is an exploration of computer vision, video editing, real news media, and surveillance technology. Post-tracking, facial recognition, and image compositing tools are joined by an AI filled with stories of spies, criminals, and secret lives. This playfully creepy experience imagines a not too distant future where your expected value and risk to society are constantly calculated by systems that are impossible to question or correct. In general, I really like using installations and interactive sculpture as mediums to explore many diverse and interrelated themes. This installation, Miss Messages, was the first I've ever worked on, a prototype created in the span of mere weeks, and also my favorite among all of my works to date. It was an installation that encourages visitors in a space to consensually engage in emotional labor and care, transmitting hugs to be stored for later retrieval by others. I like utilizing the spaces between and beyond the physical artifacts themselves, and enjoy making work that is both about and a medium for tactile creative space sharing and for collective placemaking. This interactive installation, Collab Comp, was developed as a physical and audiovisual tool facilitating collaborative composition, communication, and the physical exploration of sound in space. I've also become interested in exploring embodiment and expansive interactions that encourage us both to question our roles and impact at all scales and to see more agency in art and magic and science and connection all around us. I'm relatedly really fascinated by the concept of the hidden installation, and I've designed and developed a few projects that channel the spirit in some form, such as The New Frontier, which was an immersive-ish meditation on space junk and on humanity's disproportionate impact on the universe at large, and Unseen Constructs, an installation still in development. I think hidden installations could have an ability to surprise and engage us to notice more about the world and to maybe realize that magic and art are everywhere. Also, as someone into interaction design, I think there's something really interesting about designing for and making a point through being unnoticed and providing that space for moments of serendipitous discovery, reflection, and rediscovery, in a way kind of like geocaching. And unsurprisingly, given some of my prior works, I'm very interested in exploring the agency and capacities of people, of communities, and of systems, and of all forms of healing using a lens of care and magical realism, a touch of science and simulation, and a reverence for durations, process, and personal, institutional, and communal memory. This installation, An Immersive Game of Life, touches on many of these themes. It's an immersive reimagining of Conway's Game of Life that transforms a traditionally 2D simulation by adding lushness, physicality, and interactivity to illustrate the self-regulating and interrelated properties of both people and systems. This installation was produced in collaboration with Gray Area's Experiential Space Research Lab and was last shown at the End of View exhibition here at Gray Area this past spring. Moving forward, both within and beyond the realm of new media, I want to explore these concepts further with an emphasis on duration and process and ritual, still using that lens of magical realism with the same core of healing, connection, and restoration. Also, lastly, and kind of relatedly, I'm a member of Control Ship Collective, a local group of active artists, activists, and organizers interrogating what it means to build and be a part of a community. I want to make a quick shout out and plug for an SF-MoMA Community in Residence online takeover by Control Ship this week. Please visit sfmoma.org/museum from home for more details. Our collective is facilitating an ongoing activity called Recipes for Collective Care beginning this week with a live broadcast led by collective members at 6 p.m. this Thursday. So these are some other thoughts I've had lately given recent events. How might we visit an interactive, personalized place that can only be experienced online and that utilizes the unique affordances of being online? And how do we design an experience where the representation of the place is the place itself? So it's not a copy and it's not a digital version, but the only version. I became increasingly intrigued by these thoughts, partly because of the pandemic limiting social interaction and travel and going out basically at all, partly because I like creating and sharing new places and think environments and objects can really shape experiences and interactions. This is not only informative about a place, but a place itself that you generate and engage with. I want to make a web portal that allows people to virtually travel to anywhere and anything. So imagine a cheeky and playful blend of TripAdvisor, Google image search, and generative deep learning-based algorithms that can turn anything into a distant city or destination. So a pair of shoes becomes an ice-capped mountain. A row of chairs becomes a lively night market. A desk lamp becomes a wild skyscraper. These are some among an infinite number of new places to visit online, and a means for people to discover and travel to new, unseen, and absurdist places on their own or with others. Essentially, I want to explore and instantiate one form of object-oriented placemaking online. It's a somewhat simple idea. You can search for something and visit or discover that thing as a place. You can visit anything, including shoes. So some key attributes of this experience will be, first, that it's again online only. There is no other way to experience this place. This isn't a virtualization of existing places, nor is it AR or VR. I also want its style and aesthetic to be surrealist, retro, and zeitgeisty web culture, like a somehow coherent mix of destination screensavers, sites from the 90s, TripAdvisor, and deep learning. I want this experience to be generative, but also intimate, personalized, and interactive, and shareable and serendipitous. So like with many places, you can discover and meet others there by chance. And a few precedents, again, search engines. So I want the experience and interface to feel somewhat familiar, to tap into mental models of navigating the internet, travel planning sites, deep learning models, and specifically generative systems for image synthesis, kitschy and serene screensavers, and the old and weird parts of the internet, like those GeoCity sites that were really prevalent in the 90s. As for implementation and some features of this placemaker/place finder, I thought about how I'd approach converting something like TripAdvisor to be, rather than recommending a place, the place itself. I also thought about other things we see in our online day-to-day, search engines, memes, social sharing, etc., and what we'd commonly see on a travel site or when traveling to a new place. And finally, how to convert all that into the language and model of the internet. I want this to be like both the Trip and TripAdvisor, but about the internet, made by the internet, and consisting of the internet. I want this experience to feel familiar, nostalgic, retro, surrealist, conceptual, exploratory, connecting, and grounding. And I want it to enable visitors to see something they can only experience as a result of being cooped inside. I want this to be a simple exploration of creating something global and expansive together through a process of boundless discovery that feels both natural, i.e. searching via familiar search engine framework, and unnatural. That is, by doing a web search, you both create and visit a new place that is sort of weird, like a shoe. So that's all for my presentation tonight. Thank you so much for your time and attention. And in the interest of time, if you have any questions or ideas or just want to say hello, please come find me online at jellomote.com/contact. Thanks again, take care.
Thanks, Steph. Also, you can put your questions in the Q&A, and Steph, you can actually type in the answer as well. So if you think of something right now, Stephanie can respond. Ryan just did that. So
Awesome. Thank you.
yeah, so next up, we have Stephen Standridge, who is an Incubator member and also was a member of the Experiential Space Research Lab that Stephanie was part of that did the interview show. So I'll let you take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Nikki. Yeah, so my name is Stephen Standridge. I've been an artist in the Gray Area Incubator for a few sessions now. And normally I would take this opportunity to talk about the nature of my work, what I'm interested in. But recently there's been like a global pandemic going on, and being someone, a lot of artists are like intuitive and empathic, and you know, I'm one of those. And so I've been trying to explore alternative medias through this, because unfortunately, as much as I love technology, it isn't the most seamless to use as a form of expression or catharsis. And so I've picked up writing a lot recently, which is a very natural form for me to communicate my thoughts and feelings in. And I wrote something that I hope to share with you all over the backdrop of a digitally generated piece that I made for the ESRL. So I'm going to get that video going and I'll start the reading, and it'll be about 5 minutes. It wasn't always this separate, this distant, this isolated. The world once operated as normal, with pattern and predictability and blissful disregard. The ever-certain forward force of economy, the daily grind, the rat race, security, safety, comfort, all from knowing what could or would or should happen. The unconscious trust and ease around other humans and in crowded places. It's easy to miss something so big, so all-encompassing, like water to a fish, wind to a bird, soil to an insect. Small moments of freedom and choice unappreciated, understood as just normal. Independence and interconnectedness simultaneously fade slowly into the background, all for the greater good, or greater evil, depending on who controls your feed that day. Objectivity, truth, science, unity, for those do I feel the most loss. It all feels so far away, and every day gets further. 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 3 months. How long till we return to normal? In 3 months' time, a seed becomes a sapling. Vines spin and twist to inch ever further. A barren tree becomes a shady oak. Tulips sprout, bloom, and wither away. Daffodils follow closely with irises on their heels. Their absence brings a fond remembrance for the yellow and white flowers painting the greens of the grassy grove, for the warm smiles of approaching friends, for the structure and support of economic stability. There is no mourning for the petals, no grief for their loss, for they return year after year. Will those smiles, will that normal life? It is uncertain, and in that uncertainty breeds doubt, distrust, hopelessness, fear, as if that weren't enough. In that uncertainty are sown the seeds of belief and desire, wanting to know, wanting to understand, wanting to grasp the truth of the situation, wanting for any explanation that makes any of it seem normal. While media spins stories for profit and upvotes and views, while influencers repost from their vast wells of truth and objectivity, while hidden sources target individuals, narratives, and those that would dare just sit in uncertainty, injecting questions laced with division, us versus them, sheep versus wolves, left versus right, likes upon lies, upon interpretations, upon anecdotes, upon half-truths, upon falsehoods, upon secrets, upon agendas, media referencing media, mirroring, reflecting, refracting, reacting, politicizing, escalating, everything except for that brief moment when the whole media machine was caught unaware in reaction to an event so unexpected that no individual, no political party, and no conspiracy could have predicted. That brief moment when the whole world was focused on one goal, protecting life, our neighbors' lives, lives of people we might not ever meet. The most sublime glimmer of collective action, unity, and hope that has ever graced this reality. Masked by a virus, catalyzed by a pandemic, targeted for profit. That beautiful calm in the media storm before it was questioned and doubted and divided and inflamed and promoted and stoked and shared and profited and converted and entertained right back out of our reality. An unprecedented loss of something never before experienced by humanity, of something never before even possible, of something that was within our grasp before it was tainted by special interests, distorted and manipulated, discarded as a scheme. What a loss. What is loss to a forest? An ancient oak tree struck by lightning, one moment full and flourishing, branches swaying in the storm, in chaotic organization. The next, a violent crack and crash, leaving only a smoldering wound splitting the tree right in two. Decades of branching and expanding and growth now lie burnt and broken across the forest floor. Time passes, season changed. The oak, still standing, branches into the light it once caught, a beehive in its thunderous scar. Is charred half home to termites and ants, fertilizing mushrooms and moss, ferns peeking through its decayed corpse? What is lost to a forest? A storm comes, a tree breaks, and life thrives. That was it. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on my Instagram or Facebook or find me on the internet.
Thank you. That was beautiful, Stephen. Yeah, that was awesome. I love your work that you did for the show, and seeing it with your words was really powerful. I feel like you should submit that for our manifesto project we have going. Incidentally, everybody, we have a manifesto project. If anyone wants to submit, you can go to patch.grayarea.org and check it out. And I think you should submit it. Next up, we have Steve Pye, who is an artist that works a little bit with tongue-in-cheek humor, identity, and video, and sculpture, and projection. And here he is.
All right, thank you, Nikki. Let me get the screen share going here. Let's see. All right, can everybody see that?
Yes.
All right, hi everybody, I'm Steve Pye, and thanks for attending our virtual salon. Today I'm going to talk about the work I was doing at Gray Area and how the current crisis has shifted that work. With everything shut down, we've been sheltering in place and experiencing life in ways that most of us have never contemplated before. But first, I'd like to share some of the work that I've done previously as a way to introduce myself to all of you. Prior to getting involved with Gray Area, I've been doing video projection installations at various venues and events around the Bay Area. These pieces were site-specific collaborations with other artists. We'd select materials, create images to project against, and then I'd make the animations. On the left here, we have Dos Años de Oso, and on the right is the face of Salvador Dali. Next, we have The Skull, which was a bleached denim fabric projection installation for the Dia de los Muertos. The middle piece is Urban Life, Urban Projection, which is a 5-foot by 8-foot canvas with a hand-drawn cityscape. And then the image on the right is the Heart of Soma, projections that go onto a wall painting of an anatomical human heart. I got involved in gray area like a lot of people through the immersive program, and that introduces students to physical computing, programming, sound, and video projection. I drew upon my work in nature photography and the mandalas I'd been making with them. The image on the left is the source image for the mandala in the middle. Then the right image is one of the mandala lightbox pieces I created during the immersive program. The mandala was printed onto a transparent acetate 30 inches by 30 inches, mounted into a light box with an array of 170 LEDs. There's a hypersonic sensor mounted in the frame of the light box, and the LED animations change depending upon the distance of the viewer from the piece. I've created 3 of these so far, and they've been exhibited at Gray Area, Gays Hate Techno, and the Light.Wave Festival in Sacramento. In the last artist showcase at Gray Area in November 2019, I created an installation called The Magic Mirror. Viewers were alone or in small groups with the magic mirror. Embedded in the mirror was a computer monitor and 2 video cameras. The video feeds were mixed with visuals and graphics, and the surface of the mirror was also reflective. So there are up to 3 reflections of the user that could be seen in the mirror. This is the setup of the room. The vanity mirror has the computer monitor and cameras installed inside of it. The computer that is driving it is behind a curtain, and that also conceals the human who is driving the interaction. Once the users are sufficiently primed, the mirror would then issue orders to open the drawers of the vanity, and there are secret messages hidden inside. These are the messages inside those drawers. The idea of the interaction and the messages is to illustrate the relationship people have with what they see in the mirror. The relationship, though, is mediated by whoever is behind the technology, someone that the viewers can't actually see or truly interact with. So the next piece that I wanted to build was going to take this concept a step further. The installation I was proposing to build was called the House of Fears. It would be modeled after a carnival house of mirrors where everything is distorted. The House of Fears is meant to be a physical manifestation of the experience of being on social media. Viewers would walk in one direction through the installation. All the surfaces would be reflective, and on the first wall would be an LED array, a set of buttons for the users to push, and an embedded camera. The camera would give a real-time video feed to the display in the third wall, which the viewers can't see until they walk around to the other side of the installation. Buttons would put messages superimposed upon their image on that feed. These messages would be typically negative and derogatory. The viewers would never see their own face or the messages that get associated with them on the third wall display. The display on the second wall would have text-based animations that the viewers would see after the first wall as they make their way through to the third wall. And this is what that content would look like. I started developing the content for the second wall animations. The idea with these animations was to invoke a slightly schizophrenic feeling. It was meant to give the viewers the feelings that things are constantly shifting and not as they appear to be. And then social media has been shown to have negative effects on its users. Psychology research is showing a direct relationship between the use of social media and increases in depression, loneliness, anxiety, and overall poor well-being. Facebook employs a large number of people to monitor and moderate content on their platform. The effects of this work make the content moderators more susceptible to believing the conspiracy theories that they are reviewing, such as anti-vax, the flat earth theory, and false flags involving the Parkland and Las Vegas shootings. There are also increases in the incidence of mental health issues such as post-traumatic stress disorder, secondary traumatic stress disorder, depression, and panic attacks. Content moderators have also reported that they've started sleeping with guns after they've been approached outside of their office by the people whose posts that they've removed for violating content guidelines. Removing or flagging posts has a detrimental effect on the person who posted it because they are no longer getting the buzz from their posts. That buzz is the same as heroin in the brain. It releases a bit of dopamine and gives you a slight euphoria. Every time you do something on social media, you're exciting your brain in the same way drug users do. The Nazis' big lie theory for propaganda, in which you repeat the same outlandish lie over and over again so much that people begin to believe it, is being demonstrated over and over again each day on our social media networks. Except when messages are shared over social media, we get the added reinforcement of dopamine to accentuate the message being delivered. So this was the piece that I was focusing on, but then of course, the world stopped. How can you do an installation as I have proposed without endangering the viewers? And more importantly, how does one survive the pandemic? We are now shifting massive amounts of our interaction to online venues. Some are social media and some are not. But we are experiencing a massive die-off in our species. So how does one respond to that? There's retreat and rethink. The range of emotions we're all experiencing are large, deep, dark, and profound. It's depressing and paralyzing. The horror show is delivered to us live every day to the palm of our hand. So what can one do to maintain oneself in this situation? I've maintained a thought and emotion journal since my early 20s. When I was 12 years old, my older brother passed away from cancer and he was 19. When I got to be in my early 20s and I was older than him, life was quite strange and difficult for a while. And I found the only way to process what was happening was to write. It's a practice that I've relied upon since then, and it's a practice that I'm using now. There are several different mental health and therapeutic practices that recommend some kind of journaling to help sort and understand your emotions. The practice of writing by hand forces the body and brain to engage in a different way than typing. Paper is superior to the screen for this kind of work. So, what happens during the shutdown? By limiting our movements and interactions with others, we have collapsed our spaces, and this has had a profound effect on our experience of time. Because of this, I've shifted the focus of this project to the psychological effects of what limited human interactions and restricted spaces have on us. This means that we are shifting on to a virtual show. The experiences of time that I've been having since the lockdown are now the new source of material for the transformation of this project. So instead of an in-person experience installation illustrating the experience of social media, I'll now be creating a virtual experience illustrating the real life experience of the lockdown using Mozilla Hubs. So thank you very much. Very quick introduction to what I'll be doing with this next piece. And we hope to see you in June when we've got it up online for our virtual showcase. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, so Steve is going to be showing work in the Incubator, and the Incubator or just general gray area showcase, which will feature Incubator artist work as well as immersive student work. And we will be official selection of the SF Design Week virtual show. The showcase will be starting on June 17th on Wednesday. We'll probably keep it up throughout the week for Design Week since it's virtual anyway. Yeah, and it's going to be a whole like kind of interactive, immersive sort of environment online. You can actually even use it with a VR headset. So it should be pretty fun, and we're trying to just find new ways to create art online. And I'll put my video on, I keep forgetting. Thank you, Steve. Yeah, so if you want to ask Steve questions, there's a Q&A, you can do that, and he can actually just answer you. And for our last presenter, we have Vanessa Lee, who's working with sort of immersive audio soundscapes and is doing some really interesting stuff with music and sound and participation. Vanessa, are you there? There she is. Take it away.
Hey. Can you see my screen and hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So hi, thanks for everyone who stayed to the very end. My name is Vanessa Lee. Professionally, I'm a software engineer. I've been in the Bay Area for the last 10, 12 years. And I'm trained classically as a musician and also have a background in music technology and architectural acoustics. And so my background in sound and technology really forms the foundation of my creative practice to allow me to explore these interests that I have through these core themes I have outlined here. I work primarily with sound to explore and uncover the hidden realities through listening in the form of interactive sound installations. My emphasis is to use listening as a way to experience the world in a different dimension. And some of the works I'll talk about today highlight my interests in acoustics of spaces, space and time, and linking our internal states with our physical environment. So the first project I'll share here is called Sound Thoughts. This was showcased at Gray Area about 5 years ago. You might recognize this picture from one of Ryan's slides. Before it was a tool shed in a Crowbar studio. It was a resonant chamber that I turned into a resonant chamber for my installation. So I used the resonant frequency of the room as a basis of this installation, and found that the fundamental frequency of the room was about 39 hertz. And I used it as a pulsing in the background as a way to remind the listeners of the physical properties of the room while they walked around. And one participant wore an EEG headset and was able to control the soundscape with their brainwaves. And so I used the idea of the brainwaves falling into 5 different frequency ranges representing their mental state. And because these frequency ranges fall mainly below the threshold of hearing, I used beating so that we can perceive these frequencies in a way that can provide some feedback into their mental states. And by walking around the room, you can feel the areas where sound pressure builds up and where sound pressure cancels out. And so this EEG headset was passed from person to person so that they can share the roles of active participant and observer. Controlling sound with brainwaves isn't a new thing. Music for a solo performer was composed and performed by Alvin Lucier in 1965. I bring him up because his sound installations explore acoustical phenomena and resonance of spaces, and it was a source of inspiration for my work. And so here are cladding patterns, which you might have seen, where you have sand on vibrating plates or water on speaker cones, and you can see these superposition of sound waves that create these standing wave patterns, which seemingly stand still in space due to their interference patterns. And so you can imagine in a room, the sound waves might look like the picture on the right, which is a 3D representation of a standing wave. And in order to gain a fuller understanding of the acoustics of the room, you have to walk around the space. And so this brings me to my next work called Superposition. It's a spatial sound installation that was created during a 3-month residency. This takes the previous concept further and takes complex sound or music frozen in space. And in order to hear it, it requires the listener to move around in space. I took pre-composed audio and sliced it into small fragments of time, which are then mapped onto space. And so that gives listeners the freedom to move forwards and backwards in time, outside the flux of time, or remain still so that they can examine the spatial and spectral qualities of sound. And so with these movements they make through the space, they create a dynamic spatial soundscape. I had the privilege of creating this piece at the Spatial Sound Institute, located in the outskirts of Budapest. The studio is 3 levels high, about 300 square meters in area, and it's outfitted with 36 omnidirectional speakers and has 6 subwoofers below a transparent floor. It has an audio engine called the 4D sound system, and it's used to control the placement, shape, and movement of sound throughout the space. So I linked the system to a tracking device that allows sound to follow listeners as they activate sounds given their position. And so it'll be easier to demonstrate this through a series of videos. So here's a development clip of Anna trying the device for the first time. And so you can see through her movement the link between position and sound as it follows her. For the prototype, I experimented with field recordings and existing tracks, and the one that you will hear throughout is from a piece by Arvo Pärt called Summa. On the left, you see is a pitch analysis of the melodies, where time is on the horizontal axis and pitch is on the vertical axis. And then on the right, you can kind of visualize what the pitches might look like if you were to lay them out in 2D space and you're looking down on the room from a bird's eye perspective. I had two trackers, one that contained the vocal track and the other containing the string counterpart. So I'll just play the vocal quickly so you can hear what it sounds like in time. So at the end of the residency, I was able to demo my prototype to a small group of people, about 15 people. So here is a clip from a presentation. So a nice thing about presenting in this format was being able to get audience feedback directly afterwards. And having worked on this by myself for a few months, I was really interested to hear how other people experienced this. And what surprised me the most was how this social dynamic slowly emerged over time. And people felt like over the course of 40 minutes, they started to open up and develop this dynamic. And some of the words that were used to describe this experience were almost spiritual and like it was a shamanic experience. And that got me thinking, how does something like that organically arise? And so that brings me to my current research, which is in my interest in movement, embodiment, and bonding. And so rather than creating a sound installation that you simply interact with, my focus is to research how to create a more embodied experience through immersion and feedback, and how we can reconnect with our bodies through listening, especially at a time where we're in isolation, living virtually and mostly in our heads. So I'm focusing now on gesture and sound design to develop a system of interactions that have some degree of complexity and nuance that requires you to explore the system to learn the rules, which can then be adapted to communicate something more meaningful and develop a system of movements akin to language. So I'm collaborating with Paul Lee, who's a beautiful contemporary dancer and choreographer, as well as a Feldenkrais practitioner who's very interested in helping people gain a deeper self-awareness and connection to our bodies to give flexibility and a way to expand our potential to move in the world. And so The goal of this project is to give people the power to realize their potential, to freely express themselves in their own way, and to regain control of their reality in these uncertain times. So thank you for listening. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to email me.
Thank you, Vanessa. That was really beautiful, that work you did in Budapest. I wish I could have been there. And I hope we will get to actually do a live something in the not so distant future. We'll see. It'd be nice to see you take over Gray Area, the actual space. So I don't know if everybody wants to just put your camera on, and maybe I can capture a quick screen cap of all our faces. We can just say goodbye. Let me I'll put my camera on. How about that? So I can I'm gonna get this screen cap thing ready. Oh yeah, Seabrook, Jackie, you're on there. I'll give you like a count of 3. Seabrook. Okay, I'm just not gonna wait for Seabrook. Right. 1, 2, 3. Cheers. Oh, one more. 1, 2, 3. Cheers. Cool, guys. Thank you. This was a very successful first ever remote showcase artist salon thing. So yeah, everyone did a great job.